All right. All right, it's time to call March 24th, 2022 planning board meeting to order. This time you can use your roll call.
Yes, sir, I have.
Awesome.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I move to amend the agenda.
so
I want to change up the order of the items listed so that they are public comment policy 1, the UDO text amendment 2, for the heavy industrial ordinance, 6.7 manufactured home part 3, and 6.14 RV part 4.
that's a motion.
It was.
Second.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, that brings us to public comments. Linda Lee.
Here. My name is Linda Lee, and I'm a resident of Snow Camp, and I belong to the Snow Camp Community Action Network. I've attended several meetings and listened to online meetings about strengthening the HIDO, and I'm here to support and increasing the setbacks from 1,200 to 2,000 feet. In the last planning board meeting that I listened to online, it was discussed about a certain real world situation that involved Highland Elementary School and Martin Marietta Quarry on Huffman Mill Road. There's a possible use for having a setback for 2,000 feet for health and safety concerns. I observed an online map being pulled up and the measurement of distance from the quarry to Highland Elementary. From the center of the quarry, that was roughly 1,600 feet, roughly. And from the property line to the quarry property line to the school was about 73 feet or so. Really small. It was explained that the school had made an agreement that the quarry would warn the school when they schedule blasts, so the children would not be outside avoiding dust and debris that could come that way, affecting health and safety. I heard earlier in this meeting that the school was contacted, and the principal said, it's not a really big deal. If you live with something long enough, you get used to it. Okay. So, dust could be going in the building. It's not just settling on the cars, it's settling in the playground. Okay. So that's something to think about. I know I'm probably repeating here, but the 2011 HIDO that was amended in February of 2020 states these uses by their very nature produce objectionable levels of aesthetic impact from traffic, noise, odors, vibrations, fumes, light, smoke, and other impacts upon the lands adjacent to them. These standards shall allow for the placement and growth for such uses while maintaining the health, safety, and general welfare standards of the established residential and commercial areas in Alamance County. It also helps reduce conflict between neighboring businesses, such as having an asphalt plant next to your favorite local cafe, or a quarry next to a farmer that's supplying community food.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Okay, I do support the 2,000 setback. Thank you.
Max Moore.
I have a couple items I'd like to bring to your attention. It looks like to me we're getting back to where we need where we need to be on the mobile home park ordinances. But I do have a couple questions on how mobile home parks got labeled non-conforming last year in June. Come to find out, there's two highways on the internet, on the website. So May 11th of last year, there was a draft UDO posted online containing the same mobile home park language as before. May 13th, y'all reviewed that draft, and that same one contained language as the 2016 mobile home park ordinance on expansion, mentioning nothing about nonconformance. May 19th, looks like you didn't have a meeting. On June 10th, the planning board reviewed the draft UDO again, which at that time contained 20 more pages than the last time you reviewed it. Then the planning board sent it to the commissioners for public hearing and approval. June 21st, the commissioners approved a UDO containing all the language labeling us non-conforming, opening that can of worms up. We have reviewed all the minutes and watched all the YouTube recordings from these meetings and didn't see mobile home parks discussed by the planning board at none of these meetings. Y'all never decided to change Rule 900 to the new 3.2 rule. In a previous meeting, I heard a board member tell the public that we haven't changed anything from the previous ordinance and it moved over to the UDO the same as it was before. But that's not correct. It's already changed. In Rule 3.2, it says you would need to replace it with the exact footprint. Example, it's hard to upgrade and replace with a new home if it's an 8 to 12 foot wide home on the lot now, and new widths of homes are 14 to 16 foot wide, in most cases longer. So the question I have for y'all tonight is, why was it changed? Who did it, and under whose authority was it changed? Why should a mobile home park be considered non-conforming if it meets today's standards? We own mobile home parks that meet all new requirements, so why would they automatically change to non-conforming? This is only negatively affecting the values of the park. I have a handout for you today. The first page shows the rules and the issues and the suggestions that we have. The next 4 pages shows the progression of Rule 900 to 6.7.4 to 3.2 and or whatever you would like to call it. If y'all would like this handout, I'd like to give it to y'all. That's all I have tonight. I just hope that we just hope we can get the rules right, guys.
Thank you, Ms. Moore.
Thank you.
Philip Morgan.
Good evening, y'all. I'm not gonna be on the mobile homes right here about the RV ordinance that you're working on. First is land separation. RV parks are not noisy or a pollutant industry. We don't feel any land spacing is necessary. I've talked to quite a few people in the area. I hadn't hit any objections of wanting them or any of the facility of the county. Land spacing is zoned to make an undesirable build. That's all. That's all I see. I have not talked to anyone who finds this use offensive, unsightly, and sees them as an issue in the community. We would like to ask the land space to be taken out. Second is the screening. In our case, and I believe in most cases, these facilities are going to be built around farms, old stuff, stuff that's existing. If we get in there planting buffer zones, we got 2,000 feet of stream at mine. We can't plant a buffer zone downstream, but that ain't gonna do it. We've got fence lines that's got 200-year-old oak trees. I don't know how they are, cedar trees. That'd be a good natural feature to leave, to landscape, to make it where people can see and feel homey. I've got an area that has a septic field. It'll be multiple acres if we're allowed to build. It's not much use screening that if it's already got an old, fence line with just cedars in it that's this big. I mean, we can rip them out and put something else, but I don't see where you're accomplishing enough. And on the 1,000 feet screening that you can see it from, well, the new high school again is built from one of the biggest mobile home parks in the county to do across the road. So apparently it wasn't an issue when they built the school, so I don't know why it would be an issue from here moving forward. That's on screening. Road width. Interstates have 12-foot wide lanes. The office in front of my house, in front of my office is a 45-mile-per-hour road. The whole road's 18 feet. Looks like the roads run from 18 to 20 feet. And the ordinance that we're proposing with the RVs, we got 26-foot wide roads. Seems to be a little excessive to me. Again, we would ask the board to take completely out the land space because it's unnecessary. We would ask the board to let us use existing features or have none where the planting is going to go away, take away from the character of the property. Again, we got a 400-year-old oak tree at the neighboring property. They ain't gonna be able to see if you plant buffalo, which will let the facility in the community keep the appearance it's taken hundreds of years to grow and develop. You know, don't make us take down 200-year-old oak trees and cedar trees to plant back some approved shrub that, 10 years to figure out bagworms want to eat. That's it. Thank you.
Ron Spinhofer.
Good evening. I originally wanted to support the 2,000-foot buffer zone. Industry that it seemed that it was going to be suggested after the subcommittee meeting last weekend. But prior to this meeting tonight, I heard that it's probably going to be 1,500 feet. So I'd like to support. I throw my support to that. I'd also like to know if would request that we can get a status update on the snow camp quarry permit, operating permit, and also I have not been able to find any clear procedure for making complaints about that. And it would be helpful if we could get some guidance on that from the planning department, perhaps in conjunction with the legal department, to the planning department's website so that we know what procedures are when an industry acts badly. It seems like to me that there should be some repercussions for the industry to operate without an operating license. I know if I were driving a car without a driver's license, there would be repercussions if I were up to that. Yeah, that's all. Appreciate you get action on it. Thank you.
Ruth Rogers.
I just want to also agree with the 2,000-foot setback for heavy industry. And I want to second what Ron was saying about the new quarry. A lot of us are very confused that they are operating without an operating permit. And they've been doing this for several months. And it's clear that they are all operating. And according to the noise ordinance, industries are not supposed to be operating outside of the 8 to 5 Monday through Friday time frame. They operate on Saturdays, beginning at 7 in the morning, and they operate Saturday afternoon. So I feel like I have written numerous letters to the planning board and to the commissioners. I also I called the sheriff's department one afternoon when they were operating at about 2:30 in the afternoon, and I don't understand why we don't get an answer about that. Why they're allowed to operate outside of, and they say on their website, the Alamance quarry states that their hours are 8 to 5 Monday through Friday and 8 to 12 on Saturday. But they do operate earlier than 8 on Saturdays and later than 12 on Saturday afternoons. So we just want to know how. A lot of us are confused about how are their operating hours, how is that enforced? Because they can just do what they want to do. And like, who do we complain to? Do we complain to the sheriff's department? Who do we complain to? I did call the sheriff's department on a Saturday afternoon. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon. And the person I spoke to said, well, he had to spend 15 minutes doing research, and then he called me back and he said he didn't know anything about any kind of regulations having to do with mines, but he said that there was some kind of regulation having to do with building operations from 11 PM to 7 in the morning, but he couldn't find anything having to do with mines. So I thought that enforcing the noise ordinance was the responsibility of the sheriff's department, but obviously not, if they don't know what to enforce. So that's just a question a lot of this camp have. Does anyone regulate that? Thank you.
This time is in the board commission responses, did you know that?
I will just state that our commission liaison had a different meeting previously committed to, so he was not able to be here tonight.
We have any new business?
We do not.
So that brings us on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the planning board. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Natalia Eisenberg. I work with the county attorney's office. I was asked at the last planning board meeting to do some research on what are the state requirements regarding public comments policy and public comments for planning boards. As some of you may be aware, the planning board is an advisory board. The planning board is not a governing board. The planning board is not a decision-making board. The planning board's job is to advise the Board of Commissioners and make recommendations on types of land use regulation and other matters related to the planning board duties. Now, because for that reason, there is no state requirement that the planning board have a public comment period. That is not a requirement by law. It is required by law that the Board of Commissioners, the governing board, is required to have a public comment period at least once a month in a public meeting. And public comments are also available when there's a public hearing. But a regular planning board meeting is not required by law to have a public comment period. Planning boards have various duties according to statute, and one of those duties and powers is to facilitate and coordinate citizen engagement and participation in the planning process. So it may be considered helpful to read public comments or receive written public comments and receive public input, but it is not required to have a public comment period during the planning board meetings. Would be my recommendation that's because it is not required to have a public comment period, it would be more appropriate to have a process for receiving written comments and written public input so that it is not during the planning board meeting, but it can be received before the meeting or after the meeting in a process that's well defined and described for the public, and that the planning board members consider those public comments that they receive, and they have an opportunity to discuss them and consider them in making their recommendations. This would require an amendment to the bylaws because currently the bylaws do provide for a public comment period. Along the topic of public hearings, I also want to address some changes that I've recommended to the heavy industrial development ordinance that you all will be considering today. One of those changes concerns the intent to construct permit section. Oh, show me slides. Okay, we'll go by the slides.
Good.
Okay, so there's definitions in the HIDA ordinance, and this is the version that I've proposed, which is the first paragraph, construction activities is the same, except we have removed the word operations. And the reason I removed the word operations is that there was not a clear definition in the HIDA ordinance as to what does operations mean. And the word operations was included in the word construction, in the definition of construction activities. So to make it clear, we have removed, we're suggesting to remove the word operations from construction activities and include a definition of operations, a separate definition. also have another recommendation, which has to do with the permitting procedures for the intent to construct permit. It appears from the language in the intent to construct permitting procedure that's set forth by the planning board. The intent is to provide notice to the public, and the intent is to provide the public an opportunity to come and make a comment and provide input when there is an intent to construct a permit. The prior version used the phrase quasi judicial. My legal recommendation, you take that word out. And the reason being is that a quasi judicial hearing is different from a regular public hearing. The difference is that in a quasi judicial hearing, you're gathering evidence, you're hearing from witnesses, you're acting almost as if a judge or jury, and it's not really for public comment. It's for gathering evidence and making a decision as if you were a judge. And that does not appear to be the spirit or the intent of this section, and to avoid confusion, removing that word will bring more clarity to that section. In addition, I also included to make it clear that it is the intent that the same notice procedures for hearing are followed. And so I referenced a statute there to make that clear. And I also wanted to comment that the moratorium, which is expiring at the end of April, makes it even more important to make these considerations at this meeting. But again, I'll reiterate, the planning board's role is to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners regarding improvements to the HIDO, but the Board of Commissioners has the power, decision-making power to accept or reject.
Anybody got any discussion, questions, anything?
Wish we could have seen this before the meeting. So we could have read it. Opinion developed of it. I can see terminology, planning board shall hold a public hearing. That's right. Quasi judicial only comes up when there's an issue, right? When there's probably in the variance process. Is that right?
That's one way that quasi judicial addresses state.
So what we would hold is a public hearing.
So like Natalia was saying, if the intent is that you want to hear from the public, the quasi judicial part really has to do with evidence. You've got maybe real estate agents in here, or appraisers or engineers, people that are qualified in their field that would speak and provide you evidence as a credible person. You're almost taking away that public piece if you go quasi judicial. It's not to say they couldn't speak, but you can't take their information into evidence because you're not a qualified person. I feel like when we've had these discussions over the last 4 years, the intent is to let the public speak and to hear that, even though it's a technical review, they get to come to these meetings and find out some information. So that's why she's recommending just taking a class.
That would be held by Board of Adjustments or the county commissioners.
Right now, Commissioner said it's Board of
So,
Adjustment.
Yeah, so we would just do a public hearing and have a process of that. We would be just a recommending.
That's right. Mhm. You would still not be the final decision-making board. They would as well hold a public hearing there and make the final decision.
We would
Very
basically
similar.
take opinions and make recommendations.
That's right.
essentially. Yeah.
Pretty much what we do anyway.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you mind if I see the previous slide where it defined construction activity?
So that is the same definition we currently have, excluding one operation.
Operations.
Yeah. It's in the first part, very first part. Yeah, can you bring up the current HIDO and show where that work was? He's gonna pull that up for y'all.
It's after investigations.
Very good. We're getting there. Go for it.
And I added. I forgot to mention, I apologize. There's one other addition to that paragraph that is different from the original, where the word says similar activities, comma, except to the extent where similar activities constitute operations defined in this ordinance. So that's also added. to the top.
Because some of those activities can constitute either one. So in the part where those activities constitute operations, that paragraph will not apply,
Correct.
the definition of operation.
Operations is construction.
That's correct. So yeah, Sandy hit it nailed on the head. Any studies, investigations, then there was operations, comma, improvement. So it's right in between it.
And you said it's critical the decision was made because of the timeline expiring for the moratorium. in Idaho. Is that what this is in relation to?
As you guys know, the moratorium expires at the end of April. So if there are any changes to be made, the purpose of the moratorium is to permit you all to make changes to your ordinance, to improve your ordinance. That's the whole purpose of the moratorium. In order to have enough time to advertise the changes to the ordinance, to have your legally required public hearing, you would have to make a decision today so that it can process, the Board of Commissioners has that recommendation, they can notice it for hearing and have it for the April 18th meeting.
Just go back to the operation slide. Yep. Good.
Yes.
So on the public comment thing, so now are we saying we're not going to do public comments anymore? Or no? That would have to be an amendment to our bylaws. Continue to do the public comments. Address that at some point, or is that down the road? Maybe. Okay. Then, of course, encourage written comments. Now let's just,
Mr. Chair, let the record, I attended via Zoom and now in person, didn't miss any part of the meeting, doing public comments all the way up to seat was taken. Sir. So make sure I heard the comments.
Special students, right? There are two places at once.
That's right. Technology.
yeah, that's right.
Was everybody clear?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I move that in section 6.5.3 regulations and standards for the class 3 heavy industrial, we change the land spacing from 1,200 to 1,500 feet.
Second, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
over here on page 59, where we've got the land spacing waiver, I move that we write in there, rather than a land spacing waiver, we refer to section 3.4, which is the variance plan for the entire UDO.
We adjusted some language to say land spacing variance. Ian is bringing that up if y'all want to review that as part of what you're talking about. It references 3.4 at the bottom of how to proceed with it. Making sure our Zoom friends get to see this too. Here we go.
This is part of the motion, this is just basically cleaning up because the land spacing waiver and the variance procedure are very similar. So this is just cleaning it up.
Right, this is slightly different language than what y'all got in your packet, but when you look at big picture, these all mean about the same thing, because state regulates variances and how they're gotten and how you can ask for them and those types of things, but subcommittee was interested in going ahead and put some language in to be very clear on that for HIDA. So this is a proposed language from the 6 o'clock meeting that would be newer than your packet, so your packet stuff is not being used for this motion, but this is.
We referenced where we were kind of pulling it through from was from.
Automobile graveyard section of the UDF, where y'all just made those amendments. There's a variance option in there, and it's kind of the same language, but at least allows consistency with our ordinances.
There's a
Great. So we'll look at that second, what you do in a motion.
I don't think you got a second.
I second that.
All right, got a motion second. All those in favor, signify with that. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
on page 158, under definitions, we've got a thing called a sawmill. The last sentence of that definition currently reads, temporary or portable sawmills, 10 acres or less, without permanent structures are included in this definition. I move that we change that sentence to read temporary, comma, portable, and are located on 10 acres or less are excluded from this definition.
Motion and second. All those in favor, signify aye. Opposed, no.
Yeah.
Motion carries.
I do have a question for you. Sure. You said and are located. We had originally scripted that in the earlier meeting of sawmills that are temporary, portable, or located on 10 acres or less are excluded, so that all those types would be excluded,
Okay.
not just temporary. Okay.
You want me to change the motion? You want me
As
just to
amended.
acknowledge it? I read it
Yes.
wrong.
No, just as amended.
Okay. Okay, so we didn't have a discussion period yet, so I'm gonna help it a little bit. Does everybody understand what this means? And I'm talking about everybody on this board, what we just voted on. Okay, all right, well, in that case, need clarification. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I move that we amend the text that Natalia has proposed in these definitions. 7.2.
Yes.
And the intent to construct part 2, intent to construct permission.
And the intent to construct permit, which is 6.4.5. Yeah. Keep jumping around. Yeah. 4.5.6 is not what we're talking about. 6.5.4. Section B. 1. Me to say the whole thing again.
No, we're good.
Okay.
It's on the screens. I think you're right. That's what we're talking about.
I'll second.
Motion second. All those in favor, signify aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Now, that that's over with, does everybody here understand what that means? In layman's terms, we can hear from the public without having to issue subpoenas. Is that correct, Ms. Legally?
It also means you're not sitting as a judge in the sense that you're not hearing evidence and witnesses. It's the public, you're letting the public come and speak about and provide input on the permit. But you're not making, you're not making a decision based on, evidence that you're gathering.
Next on the agenda would be the UDO text amendment for section 6.7 manufactured home park. This is in your packet as 6.7.5, discontinuation of non-conforming use. This is the same language, so there's no change to the language from what we proposed a couple weeks ago. If a non-conforming manufactured home park for any reason discontinued the use of a park for 1 year, 365 consecutive days or more, such use may not resume until permits are obtained and all of the requirements of this ordinance are met. For purposes of this section, a regulated use shall not be deemed to be discontinued by having one lot of a park be discontinued, but instead the entire park would have to be discontinued and no longer being used as a manufactured home park. This is proposed as a text amendment as well.
You wasn't here at the last meeting, but I clarified that.
Brings up to me anyway.
So if you got a mobile home park, you've got to take every unit out of the park. It's got to sit vacant with no homes for 365 consecutive days. And on the first day of second year, the 366th day that it does not have a unit in it at all, then it's got to come back into compliance with the new thing. But as long as there's one house in it somewhere, then it stays as a non-conforming use, but it's grandfathered and allowed to be.
Yes, sir.
And one question, that is from the date of the very last unit.
The very last unit.
It doesn't go from the first.
No, because it's not gonna be empty until the last unit leaves. So that's when the clock would start.
Right.
Yes.
Understood.
Rodney, would that be true if it's the owner's mobile home?
If
Or
it's
from,
if it's empty, if there are no houses in it at all, then if it goes more than a year, then it's got to come up to the new standards. But as long as there's one house in it somewhere, it don't matter.
no matter whose it is?
Don't matter who, no, it don't matter whether it's yours or mine or Ray's, as long as there's one there.
Does it matter if that last remaining home is occupied or not? Is there a distinction to be made there?
Well, it'd be against the law to move it if it was occupied.
But does it? Sure.
As long as there's a house on the lot.
Yes, sir.
It's
We
It
don't
does
speak
not have to
occupied.
have somebody live. in it.
Okay, so
It
the
just got
house, the
to
home
be.
itself can be vacant or occupied,
Mhm.
and as long as it's the last one.
Now, you know what, he brings up a good point.
If this condemned house is no good and you got as many wolf rats as I.
If
do,
it's
you'll-
burned out and it's just a chassis and some steel sitting there, this,
I think what he's saying is you don't show up with a load of call it out.
right,
I agree. So you have a building code definition of what that would be.
I'm thinking inhabitable.
Well, that, I mean, yeah, sure, it's gotta be a habitual, or habitable structure,
Yes.
but I just, for protection of both the park owner and clarity for the board and from the, the planning department that would have to enforce it. If occupancy factors into this at all, I'd rather it be clearly outlined before there's a vote taken. That's just my opinion.
so does the health department have a definition of what a habitable house is?
No, I don't think the health department.
I think that's in the building code. Yeah, that's gonna fall on building inspectors, because they're the ones that go out there and give you a certificate of occupancy and decide to occupy.
Well, and I'm gonna just leave this in because I'm riding all over the place. I mean, there's property out there that there is, we don't say a manufactured house, or any kind of house, just a house.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just take the manufactured part out of it. There's a house there, but it is uninhabitable. If the house is uninhabitable, it'd be just as well off in landfill.
Possibly.
So I think uninhabitable would be, if there's a house there and it is potentially livable, then I feel like that right there should be not an empty spot. That's my thoughts.
Agreed.
But if you got a house that's, a white oak tree gonna fell down through the middle of it, grass hasn't been cut, You know, I mean, you can just look at it, there's nothing no less eyesore, it don't make no difference what it is. If the house is uninhabitable, and it goes extended amount of time, and nothing is done other than a drive-by. Me personally, it might well just be empty. That's my thoughts.
Well, and the other side of that thought process is if a person has a mobile home park and this house leaves, this house leaves, this house leaves, and we get down to the point where we don't have a house left in it, and there ain't nobody living in that house, not likely that that empty house is generating income. Could be, but not likely. So what's the bigger issue going on when we get to this point?
Honestly, I think.
Because the tax is still going on the property, but they ain't no money coming in. So,
In all honesty, mobile home parks that I'm aware of, that spot's not gonna sit there very long. Somebody's mobile.
correct.
So,
But Mr. Dodson makes a very good point. We need to write this so that if we get to that point, there's some clarity all in that.
fair enough. But I mean, you know, just me personally, I do not see whether it's a small park with 5 or 6 slots, or if it's a mega park with 300, I don't see it getting empty. If it is, first of all, anybody that has a park, they have for the income, that's obvious. Because we have fun fishing and swimming. But, you know, when that park starts having empty spots come available, there's enough houses being sold, and somebody's gonna want. It gets to the point that it is absolutely empty with the exception of a couple of rotted, burned out houses. At that point in time, I don't see it as no home park anymore.
Could we add the word having one habitable lot?
Lots aren't having one.
Not lot, but
House.
house.
The house
One lot?
has to be in compliance with the building code or habitable.
And having a habitable dwelling. Obviously, yeah, I mean, if we're discussing mobile home park, obviously we need to be, you know, those type of house.
Yeah, and I would just, the only reason I say, to be clarified, a number of reasons. But, sometimes there could be chances where management of one part, may be failing for whatever reason. And the owner of another set of parks or person who does that for a living wishes to purchase the one that's failing so that they can revitalize it and continue using it. In some cases, having a piece of property grandfathered is beneficial, from an investment or operation standpoint. So I think having a fund would help protect them, in those cases.
Pardon me, buddy.
Okay, what Stephen says.
When they do it, somebody else will change that.
Like so that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I move that we accept this proposed amended text for 6.7.5 in the discontinuation of non-conforming use.
So is it this one, or are we?
With
Well,
building.
it's that plus that the last unit's got to be habitable.
Can I ask a point of clarification?
Absolutely.
Is this 6.7.5 replacing 506? In the,
This is a new section for the UDO. So this is going to fall up underneath 6.7, which is manufactured home park, and 6.7.5 is a new section for that part. So it would,
so in the original 2015 ordinance, where the mobile home parks that were in existence. So basically, we're saying if there's a mobile home park that's in existence that's not up to today's ordinance,
as long as they never go into a non-conforming status, they can continue to operate as they are.
Exactly. So,
But they're automatically grandfathered in as non-conforming.
right, and we have a definition of non-conforming in the ordinance, but currently section 3.2 of the ordinance says that 180 days of no use of everything in the ordinance, then you can no longer have it as grandfathered. Well, so in doing our research, we now know that 180 days is actually barely touching the time frame it takes to order and get set up new manufactured homes in the parks, whereas before 2020, that was never an issue. 8 weeks, 10 weeks, you'd be set up. So we're trying to accommodate that 180-day thing so that the 365 days gives them plenty of time to replace units on these lots.
So the text is the same, we're just changing it from 180 to 365.
Well, we've got it written specifically in the manufactured home park section, so it would only apply to those. The rest of the ordinance would still have that existing 3.2, 180 days, because we don't want everything in the ordinance to have all 4 years.
So we have a motion.
We have a motion.
Do we have a second? Second. All those in favor, signify by aye. Opposed? No.
Chair, I have a question.
Sure.
Everything that we vote on this, like we voted on 6.55 4 motions. 5 motions. Is that now, we voted on it now, we recommended that now to the county commission? Is that what I understand? Vote on this particular text amendment, recommended that to the county commission?
Yes. Son?
And procedure. We're gonna get all this
Can you
done.
bring up the agenda
And
back?
somebody likely gonna make a motion to recommend all this to the committee with one motion.
Thank you.
Son?
All right, good evening, commissioners. What we're moving into now is a recreation vehicle park. That we have visited this before. What I brought to y'all tonight is a couple things that y'all brought to me a couple weeks ago. And very first part, section 6.14.1, y'all know 6.14 didn't exist until we created this 2 weeks ago to say we're taking recreational vehicle travel trailer parks and putting in our own section of ordinance and pull them out of that manufactured home park section. So manufactured home parks are on section 6.7 and they will continue to lie there with this additional language I just approved. We're opening a new section to 6.14 for recreational vehicle travel trailer parks. Y'all looked at this language before. What you recommended last time was to change the minimum space size from 2,500 to 2,400. You'll see that adjustment in your text amendments there. When you flip over to page 122 and 123, I took the same language that y'all had last time and put it into tables. There's a lot of words, so I thought we put words in tables so it make it easier, right? And then y'all asked for some diagrams, so I threw in a few diagrams. Y'all take a look at those as well. The landscape buffer language that we talked about, and I think we had quite a bit of conversation on. This is on page 123. It's the third row in the table. Any portion of any park boundary which is both within 1,000 feet and is visible from any schools, churches, or residences other than that of the park owner. Change your language a little bit, because I think the concept was we have a 30-foot landscape buffer along property lines, right? And then we're saying if there's something 1,000 feet away that's one on this list and you can still see it, we're asking for additional language. And remembering back to subcommittee discussions and things, this was if there's some kind of contour changes, you have some elevation changes, and there's still something visible, or your trees are spaced so far apart, 8 foot apart, or whatever, and you got 2 rows, so there still could be a gap. So I'll change the language a little bit to see if this will work for y'all. To say maybe required additional screening from view with a buffer strip or screen fence along the boundary line facing the residence. So that
With
way.
the operative word there being may.
So that can still be massaged, but in that way, it's not a required and the view is actually fine. We have that double row and you still can't see it from 1,000 feet, but we're required it anyway last time. So may be required and y'all can say who gets to determine that requirement. I think most of this gives it to the administrator of the ordinance to decide that. And that would be a going out on site kind of thing, very specific to each site. Moving further down the page, we wanted just some diagrams of what things meant and looked like based on all these events. So down above E, land spacing for your setback table, you've got the dark black line, and that is your parcel line. We're dealing in circles here just to make it simple. And then the black dash line is that 50-foot setback. Then you have the hash area, which is that's part of the setback line, and then the orange line is your landscape buffer. So that's allowed to go 30 foot into your 50-foot setback. All right. And then we were curious about this 1,000 foot. So something 1,000 foot away is looking at that property line, and then they're looking at the landscape buffer, and then 20 more feet before you ever start a lot in an RV park. So the idea being there is a good viewshed from an adjoining property owner that would protect any kind of visual concerns there. Y'all stop me if you need me to, but I'm gonna keep moving if you don't have any questions. Page 124, we get into the land spacing requirement. I didn't change any of this language yet. I know that there's some discussion for that, much like the discussion we had with the HIDO, but I did put in what land spacing really looks like. So now we're dealing with a square parcel, and land spacing actually goes from that parcel line out, which is complete opposite of your setback. The land spacing would measure from that parcel line outward. And currently y'all have those broke down by unit. 3 to 7 has a 25-foot land spacing. And then 8 to 12 has 50, 13 to 18 is 250, 19 to 24 is 350, and over 25 or more is 450. We do have some maps prepared for that. You all have some paper maps actually along the desk there too, but we can represent those on the screen. Can y'all show us, just move those up 25 and all the way up? Trying to give you an idea, if we took some examples of, we've got some mobile home parks existing, it could, potentially turn into an RV park or something, but that's what we had to work with. This one here is, okay, so this one is the 25 foot. So you only have 7 units in this one. This was actually a relatively new one that we have. So you've got your 25-foot land spacing there. And on this one, you're not seeing where it interferes with any of your protected facilities, which you're trying to keep from butting up against. That would be the church, school, residence, those are parks. So this one, a 25-foot buffer on 7 units would be perfectly fine. Here we go with the, which one are we looking at?
So this is 250.
All right, so here we are at 250-foot land spacing. How many units? 14 units in this one. So you see 250 feet grows quite a bit. Sharon, y'all do have these on paper for this. This is probably a stretch for my eyes too. But you see the dots along inside that yellow land spacing. Those are address points, which means one of these facilities fits into that dot. Is it a house? It's some kind of occupied space there in that 250-foot land spacing.
The 250 foot. Okay, so yellow space.
Yellow is a spacing, yes.
So the first unit could begin to get to the solid black line. Is that what you're saying?
The black line is the property line. The blue part is your landscape up your 30 foot, and then the orange is your 50 foot. That's where your lots could start. So you've got 50 foot inside your property line, and then you've got 250 foot outside your property line.
And so, so from the yellow to the orange, what would go in between there? Is that where landscaping would have to go?
Landscaping can go. The landscaping is the blue. That's your 30 feet up against the property line where your double rows screening and everything. So we kind of broke out on the side. I mean, the visual of the arrows is kind of more what I look at, but you can see how they look out inside too. So we have a big one too. Here we go. Here's the 26 unit existing lot. So you can see the yellow again is the land spacing. The blue is the landscaping, and then the orange is your setback. So 50 foot inside, 30 foot landscape buffer, and then you've got the 450 foot land spacing. And you're seeing where we're running into some address points and things, which means we're running into some of these facilities that a land spacing requirement would have a problem with. But we thought we'd just give y'all a visual, more than just circles and squares, but give you some real world examples around the county.
Thank you. That does help to clarify.
I'm glad. I'm gonna keep these in there. I really like that y'all ask for those. It, it makes the ordinance look better. It's really easy to visualize that way. Really, the only other things that we're modifying just to make these things work is page 155, your recreational vehicle RV travel trailer definition. I think Anthony Pierce has a recommendation for the light duty truck. We've discussed some last time that fits into this definition. You gave us a website, Anthony. You've got our website pulled up. Ian's got our website pulled up that you recommended we take a look at. There we go. So tell me, Anthony, about the source here. Can you explain this? I mean, I've been on it, let's tell everybody.
So the source is basically, these are the recommendations in the United States as it relates to truck classifications by gross vehicle weight. And we have some examples. They use 8 classes. If you scroll down a little further, it'll tell you where the 18-wheelers fall in those classes. And I think, and basically what I did was I looked at each class and what type of truck will fit into those classes, and looked at what could possibly pull an RV in probably the heaviest RV, which would be probably the 5th wheels or something of that nature, and where they would fall. And what we landed on is it wouldn't fall into the class 7 or 8, which is the examples of the 18-wheelers. And so what I thought about was where your heavy duty, your 4500s, and even maybe some of your bigger ones that do not require CDL to drive will fall in these lesser classes. And so I think if we look at light duty trucks, you see where the definition is there. In examples, 1500 Silverados and that kind of good stuff, up to 2500, which
You
that's a
scroll
light
just a
heavy.
little bit in to that class 1, 2, 3. There you go.
And then you got your medium, which is your medium duty trucks 4 to 6, which would be your 3500, 4500, et cetera, which could pull a 5th wheel, but you would not need a CDL to drive it. But it wouldn't get into your class 7 or 8 is where you need a CDL license to drive. And I think that's the intention. We don't want big rigs bringing in, well, my understanding, should I say, the intent there is to ward off anyone who would bring in a tractor and trailer, call it a RV, and pull it into one of these parks and leave it attached, which will be beyond the spacing requirements for 1 foot. I think that's the intention, unless I make the same mistake. So I figured we should change the language to light duty because there's 3 types there, and just say reference to US standards.
So that it's similar to what I actually went to licensing. What kind of license you have to go pull these things? So I went to DMV's website. It doesn't require a special license. So I think the page here is just how we want it.
Right. So I would recommend remove the light duty out, put truck that does not require a special license to include but not limited to CDLs.
Put that in the light duty definition of truck.
No, take out light duty out
Take light duty out, okay.
together and use the verbiage truck. We go back to the word and I think that spells it out.
Go back to the ordinance.
Yes.
Y'all are working in it tonight. I'm just saying, didn't have to have a day off. There we go.
There we go. Yeah. I like that. And then as an example, so it's clear to the public, maybe we can say, like an example of a special license, like CDL.
This time, I'm gonna jump in here for a minute, Rod, hit me out with this one. There's 4500s out there right now. If you're carrying that black silver Tahoe pulls you over, you don't have a CDL, you should have.
4,500?
Yes, sir, there's 3500s out there. That if black silver Tahoe pulls them over, they do not have a CDL because the CDL does not end the truck. It goes by what you're pulling. If what you're pulling weighs more than 10,000 pounds, you will have a CDL.
I disagree on that because
No,
the reason being is,
that's the law, sir.
nah, reason why I tell you why I disagree. Because when purchasing a 50, It weighs more than 10,000 pounds, right? To pull that, you have a 2,500 to pull it. I have never been required to have a CDL to pull that fuel cap, right?
You ain't never been stopped by the weight.
You've never been stopped by the DMV. If they pull you over.
DMV, that's the thing, you don't even have to go through the DMV. So I think we might need to do a little bit more investigation there, maybe get legal involved, because I know several people that have RVs that do not have CDLs.
I'm not gonna disagree with you there. John Paisley, chairman of the county commissioners, told me in a conversation he and I had. He had his Ford F-250 pulling a box trailer, and having an actual box trailer. He did not pull in at the weigh scales of the F one. Black Silver Tahoe pulled him over and shut him down right there on the spot.
Yeah, and I think it would depend on what you're pulling, because if you pull as an example, if you pull a Bobcat, then yes, you do have to go by the weight scale. If you pull an RV, you do not have to go by the weight scale.
I'm not gonna disagree with what you're saying, but I will tell you this, because I've had my dealings with DMV here in the last little while. The time's gonna come, if you driving down the road with an F-250 with a dirt bike up in the back, they're gonna pull you over. Am I right or wrong, Mr. Firth?
Here, it's coming to that.
It's coming. DMV,
But does it not? Where's the 26,000?
26, if you buy a tag at 26,000 pounds, you do not have to have a CDL. If you get a tag that is 26,001 pounds, you best have a CDL.
That's right.
All right, that is a natural fact, right? 2, RVs, based on that rule, when I looked at it in that book, and my youngest son, who was not able to be here tonight, has been studying to get his CDLs. And in the book, it plainly says, if the trailer or apparatus that you're pulling behind your truck is more than 10,000 pounds, you are required to have a Class A CDL.
That's correct.
And there is no exemption for RVs.
I think we should just revisit or look at it to get a definitive answer there.
I think you're both right in what you're saying. I've never heard tell of a travel trailer getting weighted.
I haven't either.
Me neither.
But I do know some people who have travel trailers and are in the trucking business, and they pull the travel trailers with road tractor.
I've seen that, unfortunately.
So my question here is it gonna be against the law in Alamance County for Ray to take his travel trailer and pull it with his road tractor and back it in a slot and move the tractor and spend 2 or 3 nights there and then come back, hook to it, and move it somewhere else?
Why are we against that?
That was my point, because every RV I know disconnects. And I don't see why it was even kind of put in there that we want to limit it to what the pull.
Okay, so let me tell you where that came from. That's straight out of building code. Building code says light duty truck. However, building code nowhere defines what a light duty truck is. So we can take what's pulling it away. So it's not really what we're concerned about. We're really concerned about what type of units are going in. And will be building code that allow these RVs to come in, it's 400 square foot, blah, 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 what the rest of the definition says. So if we want to not talk about trucks out, we can just pull the truck car.
That would be my recommendation.
I think that'd be a good idea, because I'm gonna be frank, honest with you. As long as you're talking about CDL, I mean, you're basically under federal law at that point.
All right. I think that solves the problem. We don't need to get hung up on the part that's not really what we're trying to emphasize.
I mean, I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm sure there's a whole lot of citations that are pulling up some public travel trailers somewhere in the continental United States right now.
I've seen them behind a Prius.
Huh?
I've seen them behind a Prius.
The little teardrops.
Yes.
I've seen them pull by Prius.
And probably too, a lot of those regulations probably deal with the fact of if you're for hire or in business versus pulling for personal use.
Well,
And as far as the size of the truck pulling into the actual RV park, I think depending on whatever type of asphalt base section or whatever the developer installs and constructs in their park, they may have their own weight requirements because they may not want a certain size truck coming in and tearing up their driveways or the pads. So that distinction could be left to the park owner. And then for us, as far as land use and concerns that we may have, the truck piece can be taken out of it.
Well,
I'm in favor of that.
I like the idea of taking it out, because I mean, simply because, I mean, this is my fault. If you have an RV park it don't make no damn difference. You pull it in with a Dodge 4500 Laramie, or if you pull it in with a Kenworth with a 60-inch condo sweeper, as long as you get on that spot without tearing everything up. The truck doesn't really matter. Now, if you're gonna try and pull that nice 38-foot fifth wheel with that hitch wheel to the top of your Volkswagen Beetle, we need to let the guy in Black Silver Tahoe get.
The sunroof.
But we need, honestly, if we're talking about such RV parking, that's assuming what we're talking about. We need to let D&B take care of the driving on the road and let the folks at the RV park worry about what's going on inside. We're overstepping our bounds when we talk about this.
Yeah, we're on familiar territory. So we'll scratch that. That sounds like what the board wants to do. I'm gonna go backwards a little bit in your packet, page 149. I think this goes, just assumption, but I want to make sure I put this out there. As related to manufactured home park standards, also known as mobile home, part of that definition down there says manufactured home park shall be considered, or manufactured shall not be considered a manufactured home. That's talking about campers. Let me back up and read it in its entirety. All travel trailers, campers, or mobile homes, or any other transportable structure with or without permanent foundation being used as a residence within an approved manufactured home park shall not be considered a manufactured home. Since we're breaking them apart, we needed to clarify that and pull that out.
So you want to take the word not out of there?
I want to put the word not in there. Not was not there the first time, and that's probably important. So, not is been added for this purpose. All right, so page 156, we take that recreational vehicle thing and we move it up to defining recreational vehicle, RV travel trailer park, and we define that part. And then we define that part space. And that hasn't changed. We took that language very similar to what the manufactured home park is, and we kind of massaged that into these RVs. And 147, we're going to strike that light duty truck definition, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. And my friends, that is the end of the RV park presentation. I answer any questions that you all have.
On the buffers, can we not, down in the next thing about screening, it does say, it can be satisfied by existing natural vegetation. But we don't say that up in the landscape buffer.
Okay.
And I think we should. I think we should allow for existing vegetation to make up part of that buffer if it's there. There's no need of taking out perfectly good landscape material that the good Lord planted to tear out and put something else in. Now you may need, it may not be enough, you may have to add to it based on, every particular.
And we've done that before.
From site to site, but I mean, still, I wouldn't recommend going in there and bulldozing out trees. Plants and green giant all twice.
That's been in practice in all these old ordinances.
Well, we just
So
need
that's
to
what we'll
say
do.
it. We
We'll put
need,
it
we
in
need
there.
it in there, so it's the gospel, so not any question about it.
One of the questions I had, kind of walked off the space and kind of just see what it looks like. Because I think the way the definition reads, it talks about dense buffering or something like that in the language. I don't have it in front of me now, but it talks about dense vegetation, dense, the word dense was used in relation to, and what I thought about was if we're trying to protect the character and it looks nice, if it's dense, then there's really no way to clean it, keep it clean so that it looks good from the road. And an example was, you ride down the side of the road and you see that there's some buffer there, there's trees and there's some bushes there. But if it's neatly planted, spaced out, it looks great from the road. But if we make it dense and put a lot of trees and just kind of pack them in there so it can meet that criteria, there's no way to keep that clean from debris flying up in there and that kind of stuff. And that was something I thought about. If our goal is to make it look nice, do we need it to be dense? But I think where we're splitting hairs is trying to figure out, well, does it look good from the road period? If it's a that's where we may be trying to, where we may have different opinions there. The other part that I was looking at is the buffering from the river or stream or lake, whatever you want to call it. There's already the state required buffer, and then we add on top of that. Is that necessary if it's already a huge buffer, the state mandated? And then we're going off the top of that to do another 50-foot. Then start the buffering for 30 feet in, I think is what it is now within that 50. And then the unit would have to go beyond that. Is that more than enough? Because if it wasn't about the water, it wouldn't be as far back.
I don't see
So
that. I
typically
don't
the
know
buffers are
what section
measured
you're in.
interior to the lot from lot line.
Yeah, I don't-
Not
So
from-
landscape buffering and stream buffers. Are you talking about both of those?
Both. So like if you take the stream buffer, it's already a requirement.
Yeah,
here.
you wouldn't buffer the buffer.
That's what it seems like the way it's written now, unless it's written. It seems like it's buffering the buffer.
Well, not specific to this section. If we have a recognized stream for your, whatever the state recognizes, you do have to do a 50-foot protective buffer from the top of bank. And that's across the county, that's not
Right.
specific to this. But then your landscape buffers against property lines, so.
Right.
I guess there's possibility those two run into each other, but in general, that's, you're just keeping what's there and protecting it within that 50-foot. There's a degree of disturbance allowed, but,
It's not a planted buffer in that stream. It's
No,
just
no,
don't
that's
disturb
natural.
the vegetation
Yeah.
that's already there.
Right, but if we do the regular required buffer, isn't that on all four sides of the property?
the landscape buffer is against all property lines, yes.
Right, so if it was a stream on the edge of the property, wouldn't that be that the landscape buffer would have to go on the other side of the stream? So to meet the requirement.
Possibly, but it is a strong possibility, there's already trees up against that stream and it will qualify you for the landscape buffer. And you just, maybe you have to add a little bit, not as much, like what he was talking about, keep what you got, add if you have to, kind of thing. Just, and that is very specific.
Then I guess if we did a large lot, like 450 feet or something at one side, and then you do the same thing within there, that would be a long ways away at that point. Okay, so that's what I was curious about, because I was reading that, and it seems a little odd.
I'm still not sure which section you're in.
It was,
Well, the 450 feet,
feet is for the large
so the
lots.
450-foot thing and the scaled dimensions for each quantity of lots, that's a land spacing thing, not an interior buffer thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's from the structure across the board.
Adjacent to the property.
I guess probably the largest thing I see here is the land spacing. That probably gonna be the defines this section. So it's defining everything in our UDO or whatever. So looking at some of these, here we got 150 with 26 lots, a lot of great lots, as we suspect there would be. What's the relief on that? Is there any relief, or that part cannot go there?
Well, there's a
Variance
place that's already in place.
You could get the variance only by, in that scenario, how would one get that variance granted?
It go through the county commissioners.
No, I know about the process, but I'm just thinking in that scenario, the spacing is already there,
You got to prove a hardship.
a hardship.
And on that buffer, it's got nothing to do with cleanliness. What it's got to do with an existing house and a new park. And we're buffering the park from the new house. So that the person who's already there doesn't get up one morning and say, well, good morning, 57 trailer.
And you put a
Right
bar
in
in my backyard.
Yeah, right off my back deck. See, I've been struggling with this for a long time. And I'm still not at peace with it, but I do understand on Huffman Mill Road, the rock quarry was there first. And everything else, including that elementary school, is built around the quarry. That was their decision. They did, it's in Sylvan, that school's been there for just scaring 100 years, real good. And all of a sudden, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, they did a rock quarry. If the rock quarry, if the old soapstone quarry in Snow Camp is still in production, and they come in there and chose to build Sylvan School right up the street from it, well, that's their copy. You can do that. If I got an asphalt plant in my backyard, and Ray wants to come down and camp out under it, switch it in up. But it's not right for me to go to his house and build an asphalt plant over top of it. And that's where the thought process is here. It's for the already in place to be buffered from. It's just like the agricultural stuff we talked about. If you want to put a subdivision beside a dairy farm or a beef cow farm, you've got to put a buffer around the subdivision from the farm. And the farmer doesn't have to, he don't have to put that on his property. You got to put it on your side.
So what we think about, like, so the front unfortunately gets the same treatment when, you know, I'm big on curb appeal. You have that buffer in front of, from the road, that's gonna be pretty tough to get the curb appeal because of the buffer restrictions. And I get it from the properties to your left, to your right, and behind you. But it seems like we have it on the front as well, which makes it a little tough to make it look nice. And maybe that's just my opinion, but when I walked it off, and was like, man, it's a long ways we put a bunch of buffer here. How can you make this look nice? Because I've been in some really, really nice RV parks, and the front is what attracts you to turn in. But yeah, that buffer now, granted, the sides from the other people's property, I totally 100% on board with, you know, creating that buffer because they were there first. But the front gets the same treatment as the sides. That's where it seems a little different.
You have a truck, right?
No. I've rented them several times now. In the market, tried to buy me one now.
And what I noticed in the neighborhood, because I had one myself. All right. And my wife would get online and she would find us a campground. And one down at particularly, you might like this, I try and waste it by the time. It was the maps. So at the time, everybody had it going on the windshield, you had to print off the map wish, you know what I'm talking about? So we looked at the truck, we traveled on up there and the direction said to take a left on Ray Street. So we turned. And it was in the mountains and it was a road. Tar, gravel, asphalt, whatever. And we're going up through there, going up the mountain. It went from a 2-lane road to maybe a lane and a half. A lane and a half to gravel. And the whole time I'm thinking, what the computer said, we started going through the woods. There was limbs brushing my pickup truck. We crossed the railroad tracks in the woods. There was cars burnt out on both sides of the road. I mean, slap burnt to nothing but a shed. My wife's over there just giggling and thinks it's just fun. And this is exactly what I told her. We traveled up through there. It's exactly what I said there. I said, honey, you can sit over and laugh all you want to. If I hear one damn banjo, I'm gonna turn it off. We literally pulled out in the middle of an apple orchard out of D&D building. And I jumped the ditch with my truck pulling travel trailer because I was not going back through the woods again. So travel trailers can be fun, but every time we went somewhere, we go to the mountain, we went to the beach couple 2 or 3 times. I understand what you're saying about curb appeal. Curb appeal is always nice, but mostly what she would do her homework on the home computer and she'd say, this will go. And I'd be like, happy wife, happy life, let's go. But it can be fun.
It can be fun when their park is properly maintained and people spend good money on RV parks.
So here's the alternative as I'm here, and I'm not a camper person. Matter of fact, the last time I went camping with the Boy Scouts, I promised the Lord that if he would be able to pay for a motel room, I wouldn't have to sleep on the ground. So far, we both kept a fire in the deal. But if you've got a road that's got much traffic on it at all, and you don't have some kind of something out the front, those units that are in the front are gonna potentially have light and traffic noise the while they're there. It may come to a slowdown at the point, but anymore, it's likely not gonna just stop. So that on the front could work both ways. I don't have a dog in the hunt, but that's the thought.
Yeah, that is when you select the site you want to pick, depends on your style.
Yeah.
Pick something up towards the.
If you want to get 50 miles back in the woods where they got the banjo, probably ain't gonna matter.
Let me explain something to you very nicely. I would have come out of the woods dragging my truck, dragging a ton. I'd have snatched a ton flat out of it.
You got on the rack, and down the river, you know it.
Not in this lifetime.
Oh,
I did have a travel trailer and I sold it, but I would like to have another one, and it's nothing more peaceful than walking out your door and you're out hunting, with your nice little campfire going, and it can be very, very refreshing.
well, could we make a provision to relax the width of the buffer along the street and have a street yard description, maybe 15 foot instead of 30? Would that be an option?
Do we want a motion on this? Do we want multiple motions on these different pieces?
I think we can go through one. Let's go for one so we keep them straight.
Multiple motions.
Yeah, multiple motions.
Okay, let's do it.
I move we take the light duty truck definition out of this ordinance on page 147.
Motion is second, all those in favor?
Uh,
Opposed? Motion carries.
On page 155, I move that we take body light duty truck out of that definition, which is self-propelled or alternatively towable. And take the body light duty truck out.
Motion is second, all those in favor, signify by opposed, no. Motion carries.
Hold on. Hold on. See, the recreational vehicle RV trailer definition,
Oh, I see it.
it comes down to, it says, towable, and then it says body light duty truck. We're gonna take body light duty truck out because we don't have definition for light duty truck. Page 149, I move that we add the word not between shall and be in the, as related to manufactured home park standards paragraph on line 7.
We have a motion is second, all those in favor, signify by
Uh,
opposed, no. Motion carries.
Question on the land space. Back to land space talk, variance process, what would be like, just an example, just talk between us. Like, for example, this one right here. What would be what would a guy come in, look at the variance, say, I want to put this in here, we got all the little gray dots in there, and I can only manage 100 foot. That sounds too good. I mean, we got, less than 50% of the land space on that side. What could be traded off? Is there any options for trading off something like that? I mean, how does that, give me an example. Just for discussion.
I've got some questions and maybe a recommendation that might help answer your question.
Okay.
If I may. In my opinion, the land spacing overall, the concept seems a little abstract by taking a property line and working outward from the property line and establishing a zone on somebody else's land, somebody else's property. It is possible. I know the intent for establishing such a zone is to try to protect residential, agricultural, or of some other uses. But although that may be the intent, it's possible that by establishing these types of zones, that in the future, it could have an impact on the neighboring property value, in my opinion. And the reason I say that is, if there's a mobile home park proposed and there's ag land around it, or vacant, I'll just say vacant, no structures, and they're allowed, let's say with that 400-foot land space, and they are situated such that they can meet that requirement. If the adjacent owners in the future decide to subdivide that property, and they can subdivide it and their layout has proposed lots within that zone, then are we making a situation where those particular lots, although they know what they're building next door to, and they're aware that a RV park may be there, or, yeah, RV park, are we creating a situation that, okay, well, I'm a home buyer and I want to go in this community, but those homes over there are in this land spacing zone. So I may not desire that lot as opposed to a lot on the opposite side of the development. Are we creating a situation where value-wise for that community, we're devaluing portions of somebody else's property in that situation?
I have a thing to piggyback on that. Is that even gonna, would they even be allowed to build a house in that 450-foot space?
They would, because the whole intent is timing. Who's here first, who's here second.
Right.
So that I understand, but I just don't want to create a situation where there may be a spacing or buffer that could possibly encumber a neighboring property and have future impacts down the road.
I can
And-
answer.
Okay. Oh, and I had a proposed option in lieu of the land spacing. One thing I was going to suggest, rather than just coming with the problem and not a way to mitigate it, we could possibly, instead of doing land spacing, I know we have established language where it makes provision for a required 30-foot buffer, but instead of just having one 30-foot buffer width, what if we had a sliding scale, kind of like how we have a sliding scale with the land spacing criteria here, that says, okay, if you have an RV use and you're next to vacant property, and say you have a 10-foot buffer. If you have an RV use and you're next door to a subdivision or a community of whatever, then maybe in that side of the property, you have a 30 or 40-foot buffer. And then have options for density. And if they can't meet certain width requirements of a given buffer, then maybe they should have the option to construct an opaque fence or something like that in lieu of it. And that might help take care of some of the variance questions. You know, if somebody comes in, oh, I can't meet this 100-foot spacing requirement, but let me build a 6-foot high or maybe an 8-foot high panel fence with some shrubs. I could offer that up as a compromise. But so that's one possible solution I would suggest. But the main thing is, typically, by precedent of zoning and setbacks and landscape buffers, you start by establishing your property lines and working to the inside of your property. You're always constrained to the inside. You're never really working from the property line outward. And so I just don't want us to make a condition that could encumber a neighbor or somebody else's.
The original intent on land spacing started with higher impact of development, like, you know, industrial or something like that. And I've always used that concept. Now, obviously, RV parks are not, it's not a asphalt plant. So I guess my question was going to, for example, you know, in the highways, we have class 1, class 2s that have less land spacing than we do here. And I know with the perceived element is, I guess, you know, a field full of traffic. Maybe some people aren't gonna like that. Like some people aren't gonna care. It's like what's important to Rodney may not be important to Eric. You know, that sort of thing. We talked about that. With, Camp Quarry, for example.
But if we had ways to mitigate that, I mean, it's obviously something we're gonna handle within the variance process. But could there be some guidelines, trade-off on that in a situation like this that's less detrimental than, say, industry or maybe later on, so I don't know, but let's toss around discussion.
Do you want to address the question, Tommy, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
So the first question was having a setback of X feet in vacant property, what's it gonna do to the value of that property potentially down the road? And you answered that in your, talking about it. That property owner can do anything they probably want to. What you can't do is come in there and put this development right in somebody's backyard. Now, down the road, if they choose to come in and build a house so that their backyard or front yard is 10 feet from your property line, that's their prerogative, they can't. But they know what they're doing. Now, if a person comes in here and looks at a piece of property that's 400 feet away from, potentially, from an RV park and says, I don't think I want an RV park in my backyard. Yeah, it's probably gonna affect the sale of that property to that person. And then they're gonna be the one to say, if you put me over on the other side of down the street, that's fine, otherwise I'm gonna look somewhere else. But that's gonna be irrelevant to what we're doing here. And what was your question?
Well, I was just talking about, would they even be allowed to use it, but Stephen said, then they would, you get to.
Yeah, no, you can do it.
Instead, you said their prerogative to build a house.
Yeah.
Up beside it.
Well, and like it would be the prerogative of a developer if he was to come next door and lay out houses within that zone.
Right.
You know, I would, if I put myself in the shoes of a developer, I would hope that every lot within a given community would be worth in equal value within $1,000 out of the way.
Right.
But if to make maximum use and be efficient with the property use, I laid out lots within the 400-foot land spacing zone because of the development next door, or the RV park next door. Would that portion of my community be valued less just because there's a label that it's within a land spacing buffer zone? And so that's the only thing, but the entire community is within a given one parcel, but you have lots within it that could be devalued because of their placement.
Well, here's one other thing. Say this man has developed the RV park and that spacing is there. Then somebody comes along and they do build those homes. Is he all of a sudden going to be considered non-compliant? Because he was already there.
Yeah.
He was already there first. He built his RV park and then the development came around. That's not his fault.
Right.
Why should he be penalized and being classified as being out of compliance?
That brings up another argument we heard about earlier. Who's here first?
Well, that's what I'm getting at.
Who's here first? I mean, the comments we made earlier, I think I made a little note from LinkedIn. Let's see what it says.
So that in that case, the RV park owner would be unaffected because he did what he was supposed to when he drew it and put it in, and he would be unaffected after that. He would be
Based on the
as he
existing
was approved.
conditions.
Right.
So wouldn't, if he wanted to redesign the park, wouldn't it be legal non-compliant the way we have it currently written up?
So that depends.
And
So
after
if you're talking
apply
about
2 years?
somebody's got 50 acres, they developed the first 25, that's what their approval was on. Now they're ready to develop the back half, right? They're not gonna touch anything in the front half, it's gonna stay as is. Then you're fine. Only the back half has to come into whatever the ordinance says. But if you start moving things around on the front and changing that on the part that you've already built, that becomes now a big enough change. All of it is gonna have to be looked at. And under the ordinance, and then those spaces will come.
It's almost like in that scenario, if here find some money and finish the development before something goes into that vacant land, and you won't.
Well, see, you wouldn't
Or
have to
at least
develop
plot
it. They have
If you
drawn
plot it
up,
out.
get it approved, and that's what we tell pretty much everybody comes in the office, when you're starting something new. As big as you can think, draw it, let us approve it that way. That way you have what you need, and you don't come back later and rules have changed.
I guess, but in that scenario, they have to renew every 2 years, so.
They're,
wouldn't
all
that
they're doing,
negate it?
yeah, the renewal is just saying your landscaping's still there, everything is what it's supposed to be, you meet all the ordinances. It's just saying you're in compliance with the ordinance. Renewal doesn't mean you have to start over and do all new things, whatever ordinance was approved since you got started 2 years ago. Just that you're in compliance with the ordinance you were approved in.
That's helpful. That was my worry. I'm like, okay, even if you plot it out. it's
Tommy,
vacant land
judging by the
next to it.
size of the parts, will them, the setbacks and everything be marked? The reason I'm asking that, who's gonna enforce this?
Oh, so when we go out and do our inspections, property owners, survey, whoever they want to have on site, they provide, they show us, we walk that for, to be known. And if there's any question, you have to get a survey out there and show us that that truly is your property line, and this is the 50-foot kind of thing. Very similar when we do solar energy systems, we do heavy industrial and do those inspections, we have somebody that walks with us at their site. And when we ask these questions, if it can't be resolved just by site, they have to pull somebody professional to show us.
It's gonna be on record then. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I'm gonna do an approval, and that's pretty much done at staff level, unless there's a problem, and then we keep that on record, and we'll go out when they. But between the time they actually get our approval and they actually can turn power onto a unit, or you have to go out and do a site inspection. So we hold like electrical permits and stuff that don't get power until planning and fire, and everybody can go out and check all this thing.
Quick question on the space. I think I heard Mr. Morgan say it in the public comments. If there was a large park, would the land spacings be applied to a septic line? So meaning if it's 450 feet from the closest structure, you got 25 or more, I believe is how it's written. Would that be from that septic line? Would that have to be the 400 feet, or would it be an actual unit?
The septic line could actually be in that 450 foot. The septic line is not to be considered out of the well.
Well,
So
yeah.
if, let's say that 450 feet, I'm just throwing this out there, says you gotta be 450 feet from the church, school, or occupied well. North Carolina state law says you got a septic line within 10 feet of a property line. So if in that 450 foot land spacing, the septic field, that does not count against that, well, we're gonna say all people.
It's not in the list. in the
It's not
ordinance.
in,
So
you
that's,
can't live in septic.
that's clear. So like.
Only this list in the ordinance can we look at. It cannot be anything else other than we.
So it's the piece of property.
Yeah, where no park may be located in any direction from existing manufactured home or RV park, community parks, shared by community, school, church, or residence. Those are the only things I want to look at.
I have a dumb question. You've got a 25-foot land spacing for a 7-unit RV park. So how close to the property line is that 7th RV lot?
So the lot itself can't start for 50 foot.
Right, but what makes that different from 25? In other words, it's still sitting there. It's just now it's a smaller park, but that travel trailer is closer to the line than the one that has 25 units. I don't understand. Help me understand.
No.
Help.
They're all,
Because I don't
they're all the
understand.
same distance from the line. The greater distance is from the other structures. In other words, I could come over
Well,
and
again,
buy,
that's my point.
I could buy a
It
piece
can
of
be
property.
real, if you got 7 units, they can be closer to that house.
Yep.
Than if you've got a 25. That don't make any sense to me. Why would it not be the same? It's still a trailer. I mean, it's still a trailer.
The use is still the same.
The use is still the same.
450 feet across the board. Then that way you got the same.
Well, 400, in my opinion, 450 feet is right away. In my opinion, yeah. And then again, as far as land spacing, if that route and if it does go that direction, another thing I would recommend, talking about buffering from right of way or whatever. I would say if it's across, basically the land spacing, in my opinion, would stop at the right of way. Rather than having to space yourself from someone else across the road. If we went that direction. So, but anyway, back to you, like if it, what difference really is it 3 or 4 trailers versus 25? Some people might say that noise, potential noise can be an issue. You know,
Depends on
because they
who-
might think people are
depends on
partying
who's
in
in
the
that
trailer.
trailer,
How many go there and jump
station, you know?
I expect the biggest difference in these numbers right there is.
Can y'all put jump station and see how many?
I mean, I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, if you specify a minimum lot size, in actuality, the overall density would remain the same. Just the footprint. But, you know, I guess you get back to the root cause, what's the concern that you're trying to mitigate? And in my opinion, if it's noise, you know, if someone's afraid about other people partying within an RV park and making noise or whatever, I mean, a lot of times on Friday nights, if you live across the street from the high school, you can hear people and hollering for the football game, the noise people, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's really what's the root concern that we're trying to address with the land spaces.
That was always my thought. And then you had it. Have like a little middle atrium in the center of the park. Yeah, that's gonna be noise, but the actual RV, travel trailer or whatever, not gonna produce enough noise to cause a nuisance other than any other homeowner.
Also, I do recall from my teenage days when we went camping, the campgrounds had a noise
Right.
ordinance that said 9 or 10 o'clock, everybody kind of knows that.
Right, yeah, because they want peace and quiet too.
Right. Every park I went to has a noise and ordinance at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, even in the summertime. Everything shuts down, so if you don't have a party, you better have it before it get 10 o'clock.
Just start early.
So I think that protects us from the nuisance.
Well, see, the thing
If it's well
is,
managed.
If it's well managed.
and this is something else to think about too, there is a nuisance. If we got the point that they, let's say, Arthur's RV park gets X amount of calls, sheriff's department, for noise, violence, whatever, eventually, sheriff's department's discretion and say, you know, shut down. There is no hearing, there is no discussion, there is no debate, because he's gonna take it forward, he's gonna let it this. So we've been out here all this time, right here, we've got everything from banjo playing, all this other stuff, hot water racket. You understand what I'm saying? So you shut it down, you sell to your neighbor over there, you raise goats on it.
So, you know, and there was some public comment too about noise ordinances and, you know, considerations for that particular ordinance. So maybe, you know, we kind of look at it holistically, you know, if we say adjust things here to take care of some visual aspects, and instead of trying to mitigate noise by spacing, maybe we take a look at the noise ordinance and if there's anything needs to be reviewed on that. Tanya, I think this might be a question for you. I don't want to interrupt you, but the kicker or the trigger to review this section of the ordinance, what brought this about? Like, was it a complaint from the community as to why we're reviewing RV parks, or what kind of brought the review about?
So when we take this back a couple of years, I believe pre-COVID, 2019, we had one RV park that came to the board and asked for review at that time of that ordinance for smaller lot size, smaller streets, blah, 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 because it was a manufactured home ordinance. Then we had Mr. Boyce that was last year that asked for and was granted his modifications.
Okay.
And then we've had multiple other submissions that kind of are holding out when
Yeah.
it was suggested by this board and by the board of commissioners, why don't we look at this so we don't have so many people asking for some kind of alteration from the ordinance.
Yeah, okay.
Right, it was to separate mobile home requirements, that development versus RV park based on, I think it started out at lot size. street side, I mean, just because to use, I mean, it just, you know, didn't need to have all that requirement. It was 30,000 square feet for a lot for a lot.
Right.
That would be kind of unrealistic. Not compatible or not the same as maybe other RV parks that involve it, probably isn't.
So it stems from an increased interest in.
Right, we were just trying to make it more user friendly.
Okay.
A manufactured house and a travel trailer are two completely different outfits.
And in fact, in the nineties, they were separated ordinance. They were handled by environmental health. They were not handled by planning. And then it was rewritten in 2015. It was approved and pulled them back together.
Yeah, that's efficient.
But then we really didn't have any interest
Yeah.
in anything new coming up. As far as I can tell in our records, until about 2019, there was some interest.
I did want to throw out one additional thing, since we're talking a lot about RV parks and so forth, that I rode quite a few miles with this high price gas, just looking at RV parks and mobile home parks in the county. Have we thought about what the process would be and what restrictions would be in place if one of the manufactured parks was converted into an RV park? And how would that either help or hurt the individual that took that initiative to convert a mobile home park into an RV park to make it better? Something like right now, for instance, mobile home park would have, you know, individual septic lines potentially, or a septic tank that can have the multiple mobile home parks, mobile homes. But an RV would need all that, you know, because it's just different rules. And so I'm wondering, have we thought about, I don't know if it would be another section or something to consider, the language we would put in for converting a mobile home park into an RV park, since we did separate. What provisions do we put in place to allow, and what obviously wouldn't need 30,000 foot thing to probably put 2 or 3 in that space and use the same septic tank in that regard. Have we thought about that, I guess, at any point?
Well, we thought enough about it to decrease the lot size from the 30,000, you mentioned 2,400.
Yeah.
That's in this proposal. We was at 25, now it's 24, just to make it square to 40 to 60.
Right.
So we thought about that. The environmental health is going to have the say on how many you can put in each tank and all that part. That's not a plan. That's a health problem.
You can put 3 units on one septic tank. However, a mobile home septic requirements can be and have been somewhat different than a standalone home. There are parks in this county that's got one septic system with 2 mobile home owners. Those were done back in the 60s and early 70s. All right, mobile home ordinance was redone over 2 years. I'm gonna say maybe 10, 15 years ago. Things just changed up. It used to be you pull in the driveway to a mobile home, you look on right and left, and you're looking at the tunnel in these houses. They stacked it, you walk out your front door, you look at the back side of the house. It was changed where the front door faced the street. I remember that. So the lot sizes changed some there. I do know, because I put septic systems in for some mobile home parks, the size of the septic system is not as big as it would be if it was an acre lot out here. You go set your trailer house up over here, you go fish in the creek in the back of the house and ride your toilet up to the store and grab a trail back bush. Septic systems are different. There's different requirements. That's the state.
So I guess is the current ordinance encouraging converting rundown mobile home park into an RV park, or is it hindering the way it's currently written? I looked at it, but I didn't really see anything, so I didn't know if it would be an opportunity for us to probably, when we think of beautification, you know, we want to encourage people to convert something that doesn't look good to something that looks good. I'm thinking in that case, they're similar, you know, RV versus mobile home park, that would be something that I would encourage if the opportunity presented. So wouldn't we, will the current restrictions hinder that? I guess is what I'm getting at. Because it would make it, the way it's currently written, you would have to change everything, spacing to the whole nine, to convert from a mobile home park into an RV park, even though you're upgrading the area. Seem like it's more hindering than encouraging those type of activities. The way it's currently written. So maybe we need a new section that could be drafted to just talk specifically on how you would convert one to the other without having to go through as many people starting brand new.
Converting a mobile home park to an RV park would be relatively simple. When I say that, you can put 3 travel trailers, RV, motorhomes, on one septic tank that you can do. Right? With a lot size of 2,400 square feet for an RV, we're gonna say coming up out of the ground, digging it from scratch, RV park, converting it to a mobile home park is not. But that 3 times 24, that's gonna put you at 7,000 square feet. And that is considerably less than the minimum for a. So if you have a mobile home park that is, we're gonna say currently at current standards, you convert it over to a mobile home park, that are, if you convert from a mobile home park to an RV park, that RV park's gonna have bigger lot sizes from Jump Street.
Right.
But you're saying as far as the land space impacts.
Right, but as far as the way the ordinance reads, if you do that, then now your buffering and all that thing kind of comes into play, which will hinder putting more than X amount of spaces in an RV park, which you can do now because you just said you can put 3 to 1. But if you do 3 to 1, which you say you got 10 septic tanks.
30
RV spaces, which is more than 25. So you would have to have all those extra buffering that would come into place, which is almost hindering that conversion versus encouraging that conversion. I mean, it's a thought that kind of crossed my head when I was thinking about what would you do with conversion. Does that make sense?
Well, I want to help you. When the subcommittee had gotten together last fall, the idea being there is a big number difference between if you're taking an existing park and you got a 30,000 square foot lot and then you're dropping it down, whatever size. At that time, we didn't have that 2,400, it was a little bit bigger, but it was a kind of balancing act. If you're going to get more dense, then provide a little more space past you for the people that are around you. So that's kind of what the mindset was. To give and take, give a whole lot more abilities for spacing, but give the neighbors some protection from a more dense development than whatever it is. Tell me if that's it. I think that's what we talked about.
But if the consensus is it don't matter, just take the land space and pull out.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking here that 7 or 2 or 1.
For 168.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
If you've got a good landscape buffer around it, and privacy fencing, I don't know what else you can do.
And for my clarification, is the land spacing item, is that only included in the RV section, not included in the mobile home section?
Right, we haven't touched that for
Okay.
the manufacturing.
All right, so that's gonna be applicable. The new permit.
Could it be a scenario that if you are converting over from a mobile home park to an RV park, that, your density will go up, but maybe, obviously, it's already there. Would it be a grandfathering there, or would there be the potential for variance there to say, well, you can't put 3 on a 30,000 square foot lot, but you put 2 or something, and increase some landscape buffers or something like that? I mean, Just a thought.
I think we need to tackle this land spacing issue here, or let's worry about converting one after we get one
Yeah.
built. I mean, you know,
Well,
This is-
if
this is
the
one day.
existing
Was
neighbors don't
converted.
need any protection, don't
They
want any
use-
protection, don't see a need for protection against, an RV park, just take the land spacing out. Just put a big X on all them numbers and move on with it. And just like zoning down the snow camp, you won't have to have about one get started, and the community will come up and tell you where you're from. So, you know, let people speak, that's seems to be what to do.
So y'all remember, when we were down at the courthouse, we did have one group that came up and spoke. There was a lot going on that night, but they did come up and speak about concerns that they are understanding that their neighborhood would be affected by that or protection. So that has come from the community.
I'd like to say, just the questions and concerns that I had wasn't from a place of just obliterating anything that may have been previously recommended. You know, it's just really looking for clarification of what brought the concern about, and, you know, maybe offering other options to explore rather than the land space portion. I mean, you know, and it seems like in the history, there was at one time complaints from portions of the county requesting ways to stop certain developments. And one of those ways was through zoning. And then that avenue was explored. And then once it was explored, people on the other side of the table came up and didn't want it. And then for various reasons, you know, that's how it went. So I understand if, you know, there's certain people complain about one thing, there's an action taken to help mitigate it. And then once that action may be taken or explored, there may be somebody else that comes up and says no. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But rather than just land spacing, the scaled buffers interior to the property was just something I was recommending.
Sounds like there's a lot of discussion here. If the board wishes for us to explore what other opportunities would have in other places, maybe that maybe an RV park, but how they would handle things like that and how it affects the community, we can do that.
How long we been dealing with this mobile home RV park stuff?
Looks like we started talking about that maybe August, September of last year. But we talked about a lot of different things, so it didn't get all the attention.
So help me, starting in the back of this RV stuff, we've taken the light duty truck definition out. We've changed, we've taken light duty trucks out of recreational vehicles. We've added the word not on page 149. So work is back to front. Now we're at page 123. Is that correct?
Yes.
So on page 123, we've got top along public right of ways, landscaping and landscape buffers. I move we add the highlighted yellow portion may be required additional screening from view with a buffer strip or screen fence along the boundary line facing the residence.
Okay, and then Vaughn made the suggestion moving that buffer required may also be satisfied by existing natural vegetation at the bottom of the screening. He asked that that be moved to landscape buffer. Were you making a motion on that, Vaughn?
I will. So said.
Make sure I'm catching up on page. We haven't finished him yet.
So my motion includes what he said. It's to add what you've got and what he said.
I'm just taking that back.
Okay. You get that for the record?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, that last sentence in the next block is what I'm trying to move to the other.
So that's all.
Before the motion is carried or seconded or voted on, I swear you're gonna hate me, but I have a question on that part of it too. Okay, so, the highlighted, let's see, Where did it say portion of boundary line? I'm trying to find that again. Any portion, okay. So my question, and Tanya, thank you for the diagram, that helped. But that also made me have some other questions too. So I apologize. The landscape buffer that may or may not be required to block the view from the house to the RV use. Would that buffer be planted along dimensionally the length of the house or along the entire property line? Or is it only planted along the length of the view shed where that view shed intersects the property line? Because if your property line's 2,000 feet long, but only, and the house is only 70 feet in width, is that only a 70-foot buffer? Is it a 2,000-foot long buffer? Or if you see the house from a given distance along the property line, do you adjust or proportion the length of that buffer?
The interpretation would be when you stand at the house and you look back, whatever the view shed is there, not the entire property.
Okay,
Just
so
the
if the
view shed
property
from
line's
the-
2,000 feet long, and you're in the house looking out the window towards the RV park, and your angle of view perpendicular to that property line is only say 800 feet, and you can only see an 800-foot portion of the RV park, then that buffer only has to be 800 feet long.
Right, that is an interpretation thing, because I'm taught y'all want to write that. The tighter you write it, the less flexibility property owners, everybody have to work that out.
Understood. And I know in some places it's good to have flexibility, others it's not.
Right.
So I don't want to be overbearing on certain portions of it, but that's my question. So, okay. And I'm okay with that. I just thought it'd be strange to have it, if it's 2,000-foot long property line, but only a small portion of a given section of the property line is affected. It wouldn't make sense to have a 2,000-foot buffer along there.
Is everybody satisfied?
No question.
Gotta have a second.
Got a second?
Second.
No question.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Have we changed the lot size we were talking about?
We have not actually made a motion to do that.
Mr. Chairman, did somebody else want to do this? Go ahead, Rob. Mr. Chairman, I move that in section 6.14.1, we change the square footage minimum space size from 2,500 to 2,400.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Keep everybody from hating Stephen only.
We've already done this.
We've already done that. Do we want to change the spacing on this? While we're sitting here looking at it? It is page 124.
Yeah, I don't know what the healthy if there's a healthy compromise, you cut them in half or cut some of them in half. Would everybody be happy with lesser? I've heard, it seems like there's some different opinion on the board.
As far as the extent of the land spacing.
Right.
And keep in mind, because I know where he's going, I think I know where he's going, but so everybody's on the same page. Now, we're still talking about from the property line out to the closest joining structure. Not from the unit to the structure, but from the property line out.
Right.
Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
That's right.
And that ain't that easy for me
This is
to-
in addition to the 50-foot
That's on the inside.
buffer on the inside
That's correct.
from the property line.
I've always been in favor of the tier effect, and maybe they were going about it on the wrong side. Maybe instead of the land spacing, maybe it's the unit size.
Explain.
Okay, or instead of 3 to 7, maybe that's 8 to 10. Well, maybe we increase the
Oh,
number,
the quantity of
the
units.
quantity of.
Yes.
Maybe
Well,
that's-
if your lot size is 2,400 square feet, and you've got 3 to 7 units, that's gonna be a small tract of land per se. If you go to, let's say, a 19 to 24 units with a 2,400 square foot lot size, then that's gonna be, we're gonna say considerably larger tract.
That's correct.
And then if you get to that 25 or more, then you down to the Blue Ridge festivals and all that other good stuff, and I'm gonna tell you right now, that ain't gonna happen on 2 acres. So there you go. I mean, if the lot size is 2,400 square foot minimum, you still gotta have breathing room. You can't just go in there and say, okay, I got this many acres and this is how many I can shoehorn in there. You still gotta have roadways. Somewhere there's got to be a little get together, a fishing hole or something, you know? Because I'm gonna tell you, a lot of these folks are not gonna show up with their nice big diesel gurgly trucks pulling that fifth wheel with that golf buggy strapped to the back of it to get out of it, go from me to you and say, how you?
That's right.
And with 2 slide outs on each side,
That's right.
that's 20 feet in between. That leaves you on less than 5 feet to walk between the 2 units.
Uh-huh. And you gonna slide down, you around Montauk up.
No, okay.
Yeah, I'm, like I said, I've always, been a proponent of tiered effects, so I'm good with what we got, but I'm just thinking maybe or like 25 or more, maybe that needs to be, 50 or 100 or something.
Well, this is what I'm gonna do, I ain't trying to be ugly. While y'all hammering out these, land space requirements,
Take 5.
no, we're not taking 5. We're gonna keep it going, Ron, I'm going to the main first. I'll be back.
Ever so slightly more information than I need.
Well, I was sitting there if I was a kid, I have to.
So it'll be a tip.
Bless his heart.
Yeah,
You wanna make him that offer today?
I'm not going.
Yeah.
Of course, it wasn't my home before, so.
Nice.
Now the whole world.
Yeah. Just throwing it out.
Yeah, this Pierce.
I was kind of piggybacking kind of with the land spacing and these numbers, 3 to 7, 8 to 12. Because I went, Mr. Troy, I mean, should we just set a standard and be done with it instead of having it scalable? So if we start off, but I guess what we're saying is if their proposal for the entire parcel is that they're gonna have up to 25 or more units on there, then these are the spacing they would have to map out in order to, is that the intentions? Because I think what I heard earlier was 3 to 7, they start off with 3 to 7, they only have to be 25 feet land spacing, but then when they go up, they have to have number 8 be at 50 feet. And let's just say they get some more money and they say we're gonna do 10 more, then they gotta put those 10 250 feet from the line. That to me does make much sense, but I don't know if that, am I misinterpreting
I think you're
the scales?
Well, you got all the numbers right and everything, but what you need to do is get up from where you're standing and come around to the other side of the table and put yourself in your house, looking out across your backyard. And if there's gonna be less than 8 RV campers in your backyard, they'd be within 25 feet of your house, provided your house is in 35, provided it's in compliance of the property line.
The lot, the RV itself can be within 25 feet.
Well, no, but the property line where
The property line, yeah.
so you've got the property line, you've got the buffer zone,
Okay, that's what I was saying, yeah.
potentially the first space. So when you come back your way, you got your property line, your house has got to be 10 feet off your line. So the 25 feet, if your house is in compliance, you could be 25 feet from the line. So going that way, them 3 to 7 units could potentially be 75 feet. Ain't that the numbers? All total up.
Yeah, when you added the 50 to
25.
25. Mhm.
So you could have, you pull a tape measure straight out your back door, you could have 7 RV campers 75 feet from your house.
But it would have buffer and it would have plantings, et cetera, or even a fence now.
That's right. But as the number of those units grow, so grows the distance between you and them. But if you, existing homeowner, getting ready to have new neighbors that are travel trailers, don't want it, don't bother me.
I guess my thing is, I will only see part of the park. Think about it. I can't see but a few of them.
You're only gonna be close to that one track.
To those same
That's
set.
right. But it's gonna be the one.
But it's gonna be the pain in the
It
butt.
just depends.
You're right, and that's why I think the buffer is important, because we want to cushion the neighbor from that, but the RV site that's a quarter of a mile down the road, because the property is big, it's not gonna bother me. You know,
That's why we have.
not gonna bother the neighbor, because even if you build a row of houses behind all the way around it, they still gonna be out there view, looking at 7 at a time. Max.
And as long as the RVs are there first, it doesn't matter. This is only for existing homeowners, people that are already there.
So
There is an alternative to that. And Arthur Hall, he probably remember the guy, because the guy lived out my way by the name of Jimmy Park. We'll say he was financially comfortable. Pretty much what it boiled down to is he had his farm out there, and the neighbor over here decided they didn't want to farm no more, they just soon ride around on a little scooter and maybe go to town, was actually get a hot dog, and he bought the farm. He didn't stop at that. Another neighbor over there passed away, it was time to settle up their estate, so it was sold over here to the courthouse. Jimmy Barn was real nice about it, my dad whenever I was gonna buy a farm. He looked at me, he told me, something like you just found it, and I'm gonna buy a farm. So you bid all you want to, I'm gonna buy a farm. When it was all said and done, from the time you left Copeland Fabrics there in Hopedale, you had a dent on, you didn't go far, and you was on farm property. And by the time he got done, he would slap all the way to Craig Road. So when he looked out his door, he looked at his fish pond and his cats. He didn't have to look at nothing because he bought it.
bought everything around.
He bought it, point blank. And that's what he did. So I fully understand what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you're a smart guy. But it's kind of like the conversation earlier, these folks have already left. You know, who's there first? We got a lady that's I fully understand her concern. I'm not gonna say she's wrong. I'm sure she's a nice, sweet person. If the school built 70 foot off the property line from that court out on Huff Mill Road. And the school did it. The school system built that school there. And they know that right where it was there because it ain't no secret. But they put it there anyway. Then don't nobody need to be talking about dust settling out on the playground. That's what they talk about. So it's right back to that. You know, if an RV park or a mobile home park is developed, and then somebody decides they're gonna come in and they're gonna build right up on it, and they do it, then no harm, no foul. Don't call me upset because somebody just shot off a few bottle rockets.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it, even in my situation, couldn't stop it. They built 400 units, or in the process of building 400 units behind, you know. And the only thing we could do is encourage, you know, or get them to put up a fence and keep it. I'm glad I kept my trees behind me. And so I'm thinking that's the same scenario. You know, we really, at the end of the day, shouldn't. I think the buffer needs to stay present, but increasing the buffer because it expands. I don't know, it's just hard for me to grasp that concept when you still got that person that's in house number one that only got the 25 feet away. And then if you add, you know, the rest of them, then they'll be protected. So I feel like, you know, you're still punishing the house number one when the first RV site got built. Because it's not a standard. So if you said, all right, we're gonna say 50 feet, regardless if you have 1 or 50, then everybody gets the same treatment, no matter what you do all the way around the property. Still that space in between there, that buffer there. And, you know, it's consistent. It's having this staggered approach going in and out. I don't know, it seems like you protecting the next person that want to come in and build. You're not necessarily protecting people who are assisting or sitting. Let's just start off with the proper spacing. from the get-go.
I expect key to the whole thing, everybody just needs to try the best they can make.
Yeah, and then enforce some of the rules. When we got no noise ordinance or whatever, if that's the issue, if it's because a large apartment brings more noise, then we need to enforce that issue, kind of like what Stephen just said, before. That's the root cause is, what am I trying to protect? I'm trying to protect being too loud next to the person who had his house there first. We need to make sure the rules are in place to protect that. And trees and bushes is probably not gonna stop that. And I think we're teeter-totting on the idea that an RV park doesn't look good or brings down property values. And I think we heard prior to that that's not necessarily true. So I think that's the part we gotta be careful while we picking and choosing what we think looks good or don't. And I'm not disagreeing, I'm just kind of throwing it out there for, doing the most good for the most people, but not being able to satisfy everybody.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I have a proposal or a motion.
Yes.
My motion would be on the 3 to 7 units and the 8 to 12 units. Those spaces could stay the same, 25 and 50. 50-foot buffer to that, you've got 7,000 feet. On the other three, the 13 to 18, 19 to 24, and the 25 plus, you change that to 150-foot spacing. And you have a 50-foot buffer. And that would put everything at 200 feet away from the closest thing that you got. I think that's a reasonable compromise with what we're trying to do here. Basically, everything from 13 to 25 or more would be 150-foot spacing. You add the buffer to it, that's 54 feet. That's the 200-foot space. I think that's a reasonable compromise. Y'all like it, fine. If you don't like it, you ain't gonna hurt my feelings.
Second. We got a motion, 2 seconds.
So it's 150 from 18 to 25 more? Is it 13?
13.
There's
More
only
than
3 numbers
13
that you're gonna have, 25, 50, and 150.
So we got a motion in 2 seconds. We're gonna make sure everybody gets the correct view. All those in favor signify aye. Opposed, no. Okay, Ms. Tanya,
Yes, sir.
what else do you have for us?
I have no more business for tonight.
Okay, then that brings us to announcements and discussions.
I have
I don't
no-
think we have
Don't we
none.
need to make all this official now?
Well, you know what? Let's back it up a little bit. We have departed, but we do need to make a motion that section 6.14 be put in the ordinance. As written, because there are parts that y'all changed, but we've never actually adopted the rest of them.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I move that we put, 6.14 recreational vehicle travel trailer parks in the UDO.
I also need to make sure that that motion includes the consistency statement, which each of you have at your place.
That's what she said.
we have a motion, we have a second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify aye. Opposed, no.
Hold it up. Is that gonna work?
Yes, sir.
I'm talking to the lawyer.
Oh, sir.
You're recommending that it be included in the ordinance. Only the Board of Commissioners can officially add it to the ordinance.
With the motion that I made with her and
Legal.
verbiage,
Yes.
gonna work for what we need to do tonight.
So,
Okay.
now my question to Ms. Tanya, is that pretty much everything you had on the agenda?
that is everything we had on the agenda for tonight. The public comment policy, we will add that back in April 14th, maybe for more discussion after which I've heard.
And that's pretty much it.
Yes.
We ain't had a motion.
That's a
We
motion.
got to make a motion, a recommendation to the commission that we've been
I thought you
working
done
on. We
that.
ain't done that yet.
Do it then. Like that fact.
Don't bring his hammer back. He don't deserve it. Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I move that we recommend to the commissioners to adopt text amendments for section 6.5 of heavy industrial that we've already discussed and amended. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Say aye.
Opposed?
No.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I move that we recommend to the commissioners that they adopt the text amendment section 6.7, the manufactured home ordinance that we've tweaked and adjusted tonight.
Motion is second. All those in favor? Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Now, we've got a motion to put the 6.14 in the UDO. So we just gonna make one motion for them to put it in there as it's been amended tonight.
Right, and y'all motioned each section that you wanted different than what was already suggested.
So I'm doing one holistic motion for what we've adjusted piece at a time and the whole thing.
That'll be fine.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I move we recommend to the county commissioners to put the UDO text amendment section 6.14 recreational vehicle and travel trailer park in the UDO as we've amended it tonight.
We have a motion. We have a second. Motion second. All those in favor, signify. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, I move adjourn.
Have a good evening.